So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, How Turnkey Data Center Solutions Improve Patient Healthcare Efficiency. This webinar is brought to you jointly by PCX and ITRenew with support from the Open Compute Project. My name is Garrett Cutler, Marketing Specialist at PCX. I will be moderating today. I would like to ask all attendees and those who join later to please hold your questions and comments for the end, as we will devote time to answer them following our presentation. Now, without further ado, let's introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is the Director of Sales and Marketing at PCX, Rob Coyle. He oversees the customer journey and removes friction from the client problem-solving processes. Coyle has 10 years of in-depth hands-on experience in the data center industry, with experience selling electrical switchgear, emergency backup power systems, and avionics systems for commercial construction. Coyle is also the Open Compute Project lead for data center facilities. How are you doing today, Rob?
Good, thanks, Garrett.
Our second panelist is ITRenew Head of North American Sesame Sales, George Reitz. Reitz takes an outcome-focused approach to evolving technical, financial, and sustainability needs of customers, while applying deep operational industry and application knowledge to take the guesswork out of infrastructure transformation. George has also contributed to the incubation and development of hyperscale data center solutions, while contributing as an OCP Platinum member. George, how are you doing today?
Hey, Garrett and team, thanks for having me. Great.
Great to have you here. And our final panelist is the Vice President of Channel for the Open Compute Project, Steve Helvey. Helvey educates organizations on the benefits of open hardware designs and community-driven engineering for data centers, while working closely with solution providers and manufacturers to help adopt the OCP tenets of efficiency, impact, scalability, and across all market segments. Now that we've met our expert panel, how you doing, Steve, by the way?
I'm good, thank you.
Here. It's great to have all of you guys here. And now that everyone's met you guys, I think it's we're going to talk a bit about the unprecedented data volume increase across the medical sector and how it's really necessitating a quick, efficient data center solution in these troubled times. And it's really no secret that data volume continues to increase across the board for all industries, no matter what sector you're in. In fact, IDC projects the volume of data in healthcare to grow faster than it will in other sectors due to advancements in healthcare analytics, frequency, and resolution of MRIs and image and video related data capture. And that was in 2018. Imagine how long that it's been and how much data volume has increased since COVID started. And according to the Stanford Medicine and Statista studies from 2017 and 2019, this is already taking place as the amount of data generated grew from 153 exabytes in 2013 to 2,314 exabytes in 2020. That's a remarkable increase. The problem? Business Wire asserts 60% of healthcare organizations lack the strategy to handle this data increase, and they have not implemented a solution moving forward. That's where data centers come in. As more patients seek care, medical facility data demands are rapidly increasing, from electronic health records and digital scheduling to the processing, management, and storage of comprehensive medical imaging, testing, and reports. All of the above. All of it has become both operational and regulatory mandates across the healthcare system. And with this in mind, George, what kind of strains do these new demands place on medical facilities and professionals?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely data volumes increasing and definitely increasing patient care required, right? I think about the data growth and associated strains similar to how I think about today's landscape since COVID and kind of the shelter in place orders, right? Which is similar to any enterprise. My remote office also required a lot of upgrades, right? And so, more data, more bandwidth, and obviously new applications are driving cloud-enabled workloads, right? Which parallels the need for data center modernization.
Rob and Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would agree. What we were seeing is not just healthcare specific, but as George mentioned, it's upgrades across the board. And these strains with telehealth and everything like that is just exponentially putting strain on facilities that healthcare providers may not be equipped to handle, and they may be working with particular facilities that simply can't handle the workloads.
Garrett, I think the statistics you shared are jarring. It's twofold from my perspective, just from a personal experience basis as a user of healthcare, right? Not only do you have more people needing access and gaining access to modern healthcare facilities just in numbers, but how we interact, with more touchless interactions, telehealth, all these extra services per patient is growing exponentially. So you have this compounding effect that is really going to create some bottlenecks here. It already has.
I agree. Steve, what do you think the benefits are of the new infrastructure models when it comes to speed, reliability, and quality of patient care, especially in the medical sector?
Well, when it comes to speed, you can look at the speed of data, or you could look at the speed of deployment. In the speed of data, this may mean that you have data that needs to be gathered, processed, and decisions being made without a lot of time to, say, go back to a core data center or even go up to the cloud and back. So having the proximity of a facility near the healthcare facility is going to be really important for latency reasons. For example, let's say it's urgent care or chronic illness, where that data needs to be processed quite quickly. So having a facility that's right next to the hospital, as an example, adds a great deal of efficiencies. When it comes to speed of deployment, the great thing about this new wave of infrastructure and the modular concept is that it can grow quite rapidly for surges in healthcare needs, as well as you can provide these units in remote areas. You can move them around, so you're not tied to one facility. So it really does give you a great deal of flexibility when it comes to speed of deployment. Reliability factors a lot to me into the software piece. As healthcare organizations start to write new software applications or to use current cloud-enabled software applications, that builds a resiliency layer where you do not necessarily need to worry about the bottom hardware layer. So it disaggregates, and so you're running a software-defined data center. And it really allows you then the flexibility to use open designs or unbranded commodity-based hardware. And just a comment about patient care, and we talked just a minute ago about telehealth services. I was reading an article where this hospital in Ohio last year, I think they said they had 19 virtual visits the entire year, and they did over 40,000 in just a quarter of this year. And they said it's not going away. And now we're talking about bandwidth. We're talking about processing all this information and having a really good experience at these local community health clinics. And that's where this type of infrastructure, being able to have a modular design placed close to the facility, really comes into play.
And I agree, experience, quality, and efficiency are the three big tenets that we're looking at here. George, do you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Steve's right on, but the primary drivers for this partnership between PCX and Open Compute in general, right? The project itself is, as it relates to healthcare, is helping customers, right? Which is deliver business outcomes through these turnkey solutions, right? I think that's really specifically what I'm trying to talk about, which is there's real world applications driving real work returns right now, right? And so again, I think for us is how do we, back to the rapidly deploying infrastructure, how do we do that, right? So today we do things around reference designs, fully integrated racks, rows, and even modular facilities is kind of what we're talking about today. So again, leveraging proven open source technologies that rapidly iterate, right? And are available at scale also, right? And at scale with consistent and sustainable supply, right? All those elements are pretty key to the business we do together.
Talking about, open source technology, Rob, how are hospitals currently securing and adding to their critical IT infrastructure to ensure that vital care for patients coming in?
I think we're seeing it, in different ways, across the infrastructure stack, right? There's now cloud providers that offer solutions that work for healthcare facilities. But I think, historically, a lot of them relied on on-premise data centers that ran applications very specific to to their operations, be it HIPAA requirements or just, the software requirements that, are not available to run in a remote stack. So trying to find a balance of, what can go in the cloud, what should go in the cloud, and what should be on-premise is something that, healthcare providers need to be exploring now. The advantage of kind of this modular approach and having different, redundancies based on what's available is that if you have, like a time we just saw with the pandemic, where the healthcare resources were needed was very different, right? You can't just build every location the same way. And you can, as Steve said, you could move these devices, you can move this infrastructure where it's needed. And we saw that done on a project where we're involved in sterilizing PPE for use in hospitals. Those were modular units that could be quickly deployed when you had an outbreak. And so infrastructure needs around software and IT loads are no different. If there's people there, if there's needs there, you're going to have ways to support them.
And George and Steve, do you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, that hybrid approach that Rob mentioned, all organizations are going to use the public cloud for some applications, and others are going to be best suited for private cloud or on-premise deployments. And I think that's where the importance of a partner comes in, is being able to help identify those applications, because they have the experience about what works well in the cloud, and they also have the resources, and they've done this before. So I think it does go back to a strong partner when it comes to deploying infrastructure at any level.
Yeah, just to add a tiny bit on there, right, which is kind of the question of on-prem versus cloud versus other versus core data center versus micro data center versus anything you can think of in those spaces. For me, I think definitely the IT modernization in itself, kind of the definition says we require both, right? We require on-prem and we require cloud, right? They need interoperability, right? So leveraging technology like we spoke of earlier in and around, container technology, portable applications, cloud native, maybe legacy apps ported to cloud native application environments, right? So all those things are pretty paramount to saying, I have a workload and it's really important that this customer gets this workload run properly. And so how do I do that best? And again, back to Steve's kind of point, which is it might be at the on-prem, it might actually be on the healthcare floor, right? It might be in the hospital floor where I need to be closer to that machine because that latency time is even more paramount than this kind of remote cloud application. So again, I think the key is interoperability between all clouds and all workloads.
Agreed. So we're talking here about implementing a turnkey data center solution to deal with that increase in data volume, and interoperability plays into that. But Rob, let's start off. What can you tell our audience? What is a turnkey modular data center, and how is it different from the standard approach to data centers?
Yeah, just very simply is that you're delivering a product that is delivered more than built, right? And it just seems like in the context of healthcare that this is a great approach. We're seeing it deployed as a way to not disrupt the critical capacity that's going on site. Hospitals are a tough environment to work in. Ask for anybody who's built anything near or in a hospital. So the more we can do off-site and have a pre-configured solution delivered, ready to go with servers stacked and racked inside. It's already been started up off-premise. You have backup, UPS power, distribution, fire suppression, whatever the requirements are of the facility it's going to, has been done enough in advance so that it can minimize its impact on site. So this is a data center in a box, and you can plug in and go for more or less.
And George, how do these data centers in a box, as Rob says, how do these address the industry's technical and financial challenges while still prioritizing that vital patient care?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things to talk about. The TCO side is always something we all talk about, right? So, for the data center, TCO improvements always mean reducing capital costs, improving efficiency, and lowering your operating costs, right? So those are key elements. But I think, leveraging what we're doing today, it's cost-effective open hardware solution and modern modular data center, right? I think by nature, it's already highly efficient because it's purpose-built for the size that it is, right? And it's built around an industry-leading PUE. So those are pretty critical for kind of what the customer return is. And I think it's also rack scale infrastructure with improved power design and lower cooling costs. And for us at our company, ITRenew, specifically with Sesame, sustainability is at the core also. So all those elements wrapping up into one are kind of key things. I think, as we touch on a few more questions here and get a little bit deeper, it's probably looking at really what are the technologies and applications driving this, and what kind of is the output from, these business outcomes we're looking for. And so that's, I think Rob touched on it well, which is, turnkey rack and stack, equipment, but also known, designated workloads that are going to run on that equipment.
Yeah, speaking of the equipment, we talk a lot about, open technology in data centers today. And Steve, as Vice President Channel of the Open Compute Project, what role does open technology play in these solutions, and are they truly sustainable?
Well, the idea of open technologies is really a philosophy. So there's been a proliferation, even in the healthcare industry, around use of open technologies. Could be open software, could be open hardware. You have entire organizations around, say, open ERS that are foundations as well, dealing with medical records. You have Facebook groups dealing with open hardware designs specifically for COVID that are over 50,000 individual members. And the WHO has this phrase where they say managing the mismatch. And essentially it just says, hey, we've got a lot of stuff out there. We've got a lot of research, we've got a lot of products. We just can't get it where we need it. And so they outline 4 components. They say, all right, we're going to solve this with accessibility, availability, appropriateness, and affordability. And open source really fits well into those. And they give one example of a guy in the Middle East who was unhappy with his medical device, and he threw it out, and it was costing a few $100s. And so he threw it out into an open source community, and now he can get a similar design for around $3 US. And so the same applies to this open hardware concept that we're talking about today. The Open Compute Project is well over 200 companies now, 20 different projects working across every aspect of the data center, opening up the design. So the modular data center that we've spoken about today has been open sourced by Rob and the team at PCX. The hardware that goes inside that facility has been open sourced and provided by George and the team at ITRenew. So you get this pace of engineering through open communities. And there is this fallacy that says, look, if I join Open Compute, if I just join any open source organization, there's going to be this free rider syndrome where 2 or 3 people do the majority of the work. Everybody else just takes the technology and doesn't provide back. And that is absolutely not the case. We're seeing this time and time again across Open Compute, where we have companies not only just leading the effort, but making multiple contributions and connecting with competitors as well as end customers in a collaborative, community-based engineering.
And George and Rob, as members of the OCP, what can you add to that, especially maybe on PCX and ITRenew side? And we'll start with you, Rob.
Yeah, I think Steve hit the nail on the head, and it is surprising, or I was surprised years ago when I just joined OCP as a member and started participating in the Modular Data Center subgroup, is that everybody was around looking at the same problem and from different companies collaborating on the issue of we have these silos all around, right? Nobody's talking to each other. And so when we pulled those walls down and everybody started working on the same thing together, we had input. Well, this is what my customer is really looking for. Here's the situations I've been in. And so, it's more this, 1 + 1 gets greater than 2. All people working on together create just a much better solution. So we took that input and we put it into a modular data center form. We used our engineering resources at our company, but then shared it with the community and got feedback and really developed a product. PCX historically has been vendor agnostic because we know we can find best in breed solutions by different providers. The OCP was a perfect fit for us because now we found like best in breed ideas and we can just put them together into a single product, and then people can carry this design and use it how they want. But we're actively deploying it and the feedback's been great.
Yeah, and my involvement's been awesome. I mean, I think from a standpoint of OCP and the project itself and being part of the community, I've been working with hyperscale companies since 2004 or so. And so, early customers of mine being Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Yahoo, YouTube, and Rackspace, right? And so leveraging those things, those guys were customers of mine. They all had similar needs, and I was working with a company that actually catered to those needs. And so we built a lot of stuff. A lot of the underpinnings, what we see in OCP today, are actually still found there. Things like distributed DC supply, removing power supplies from servers, moving towards vanity-free things that drive costs down and improved serviceability aspects. So all those things are pretty neat, and being involved in kind of that early phase of all those customers had similar needs, And being able to collaborate together drove a lot of neat consistency around what designs came out, and actually, a whole lot of good reference stuff that I use all the time in my customers' workload experience.
And George, speaking of collaboration.
Yeah, just one more comment. Rob, you'd mentioned about the 1 + 1 > 2. That happens because a lot of companies appreciate being able to speak with somebody in a different industry about how they're handling, say, networking, or how are they handling rack and power. Of course, it's great to get your mind to get collaborative with people in your own industry, but a lot of the best practices, as Rob mentioned, the ideas, best practices come from people in other industries that you can take and then modify for your own.
Yeah, both of collaboration and best practices. We're talking about the optimal configuration for the medical industry that's dealing with this boom in data, and it's been happening. It's been almost compounded by COVID-19, with more and more patients going and seeing doctors based on what's going on. What is that optimal configuration? When talking about a turnkey modular solution, how do you make something purpose-built and pre-engineered to meet medical facility needs by way of plug and play, as we say? George.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's back to what the modern applications are. I think, to me, always the application is the driver of what we're going to do. And I think the modern data center strategy is kind of centered around flexibility and agility, right? I mean, I think two of the key tenets there are there. And I think when I think of customer use cases, and I think Steve mentioned something kind of cool, but when I think about my customer advisory councils and how I take their input, I used to think about separating them by industry, and then I started to realize I can separate them by use case. And some of them would be more kind of on-prem, some would be colo, and now some of them are edge-like, right? And so I've got these different kind of customer advisory councils that do mix healthcare in different industries together. And so for me, it's actually finding the similar applications. So when I think about my top 3, I'd say customer engagements right now, I deal with a lot around, we'll call it container technologies, making applications portable. And a lot of it revolves around open source things like Kubernetes. Some of it's around virtualized environments like VMware, and those are found obviously in very enterprise environments. I think, so that's one of them. I think definitely making applications portable and run anywhere, that's pretty key. The other side of it's converged infrastructure, right? We've got a whole lot of legacy stuff. We've got a whole lot of legacy builds. We've got some really old, we'll call it structured, large storage tiers. And those are starting to consolidate, right? And those are starting to drive towards, we'll call it a balanced hyper-converged or converged infrastructure, giving consolidation of applications and giving customers a chance to think about these at a rack level as opposed to a node level, right? And so that's probably case 2. And then thirdly is obviously all these really modern workloads that are driving this low latency, high performance kind of engagement, especially around the networking side. And that's around advanced analytics, right? So advanced analytics can be a lot of things. It's a broad topic, but for the most part, it's machine learning and deep learning combined with some artificial intelligence. So those AI buzzwords are always out there, but there's real stuff and real work being done with those. And it's definitely seen in terms of new things and new engagement models. Obviously, telehealth, but also things like bot technologies, right? So all these things are driving new use cases. And I think for me, it's always making sure I'm understanding what the customer drivers are and how I produce that business outcome for them.
And Steve, what can you add?
Yeah, this optimal configuration does depend a great deal based on the workloads that you're trying to do. I do know that a lot of people think that this is an entire lift and shift. All right, well, if I move to this model, I've got to do everything this model, and I'm very comfortable with doing what I'm doing. And that's not the way that a lot of companies embark on an open concept. So they'll start small, and then they set a roadmap. And sometimes they use this method to say, all right, we're going to start with open networking first, and then we'll move to the server, all contained in, say, a new modular data center. And that's the other great thing about this design. It allows you to start small without doing a giant lift and shift. And I think that setting realistic expectations about how fast you can move your infrastructure is extremely important, and having executive sponsorships and the right project team involved to understand what is the optimal configuration. And again, it goes back a lot to the partner. I've said this before, but having a strong partner, whether or not you use them on the ground or just as an advisory council, it's important to have those people that have done this before and that have helped people move from a legacy infrastructure to a net new open infrastructure.
And Rob, we talk a lot about plug and play with modular and especially with turnkey. Can you speak to the audience a little bit more about plug and play and what that means as in the medical industry?
Yeah, I think plug and play only works if you have the right thing. And Steve talked about it at the executive level about coordination, right? Making sure everybody's involved, all the stakeholders are involved. Historically, PCX perspective is on the infrastructure side. A partnership with ITRenew, where we can better understand the application and the hardware involved to run those applications, really makes this a great partnership. And in the context of open compute, we have a much larger toolbox of solutions we can use. So, and George had mentioned earlier about optimization and having the right thing. That really comes down to right sizing. Do we have the right amount of hardware? Do we have the right amount of infrastructure to support that hardware? And can we put it in place? And if it's best fit and optimized for size, it can be very turnkey. It can be exactly what you need, where you need it. And that's where, turnkey isn't just the device and it lands on your site and you hook it up to power and it's going. It has to provide a business function and it has to be implemented. So you need good partnerships that may require more than one, and with people with different perspectives and expertise to make it happen.
And George and Steve, do you have anything to add before we move on?
No, I mean, for the most part, I just would touch on the key comment he mentioned around, having it where you need it. I mean, I think that's an evolving story right now, and I think it's something we definitely should be talking about, which is, I think about the challenges a customer like mine might have in trying to find really high performance, low latency use case that needs to run somewhere. And where do they run that? I don't know, right? I mean, there's this tie-in between telecom and there's a tie-in between 5G and there's a tie-in between real low latency at the edge and all those different things. Well, how do you find these? I mean, building out a new edge for an organization outside of the core data centers and colos that are out there is a challenging instance, right? Especially in the terms of sheer numbers. And so a lot of times, and I think we might touch on this a little bit in our conversation later, but I think one of the key things I see is, do you go buy that edge or do you go build it, right? And I think that's this build versus buy question. And I think many organizations, especially since they own something unique, which is real estate, they're at a good advantage point there. You own the real estate. There's a lot of connectivity you already have. You're tied to other organizations, other healthcare facilities, or research organizations. So having that kind of mesh network of what you already have tied to the real estate that you own pretty much creates an optimal environment to be making the statement, which is build your own, right? In many cases, especially as it relates to improved performance and experience for the customer, and that's the client, right? And I think that's, as long as they're focusing there, I think you're going to be able to produce some real world solutions by building your own in many cases.
I agree. Steve, did you have anything?
No, I think that Rob and George did a great job of summarizing that.
Awesome. So we're going to move on to the next slide. We talk on premises, and turnkey and on premises are synonymous. And physical on premises data centers offer higher computing and processing speeds, which empower electronic health record accessibility, medical imaging, communication, and clinical workflows that are vital for patient care. And, we talk on premises, and I know there's other solutions like cloud and colocation. But with cloud and colocation solutions gaining popularity in the medical IT space, what kind of efficiencies or advantages are there in choosing a physical data center for a medical facility's IT infrastructure, George?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of slid into that a little bit on the last one, but I think we often hear of, hybrid cloud or multi-cloud, right? And I think that's something we continue to hear about, that organizations need to figure out how they have a hybrid cloud approach. And what does that mean? Typically, that means some on-prem plus some bursts of the cloud. Sometimes it means bursts between two clouds, right? So I think making sure you have the ability to run both your legacy applications and modern workloads, right, where they're most effective for the business, right? So I think that's really the return we're looking for, and trying to figure out where that lies is where we come in to help, right? So I think, again, focus for me is understanding what the requirement is, what the business outcome you're looking for is, and how we best solve that. And many times it's offering a turnkey solution that typically is on-prem, especially around things around compliance or data security, or just your crown jewels, which is your information and where that lives and how long it lives there, right? Those are all aspects I think about in thinking about where this facility should be. And to me, facility should be everywhere. right? It should be, you should have a strategy that has facility where you need it when you need it, right?
I agree. Rob, can you speak more to those advantages? Or Steve,
Yeah,
you can
I
also-
think
Rob, go
when
ahead.
yeah, when you're talking about having it in the right place, most of our customers, all of our customers, choose modular because they really don't want to be in the construction business, right? They don't want to be building buildings and taking up their capacity and space, to do activities that are going to be temporary. What they're after is an end result, and finding partners that can help you get there quicker is a huge advantage. And as I said earlier, hospitals are a tricky place to work on the construction side. Not everybody can do it. So you have a limitation in which types of contractors can actually do that work. So removing that workforce off-site and having something that's ready to go is a huge advantage. The other thing that I'll mention is that the environmental requirements of your data center might be different than the business environment, right? That what your main business is doing. Typically, it's reverse. When we're delivering a modular data center to a factory, maybe the factory doesn't even have air conditioning, right? It's open, and the IT requirements, has HVAC, and so I can isolate that and create that environment in a small place. So not only do I reduce my capex to create this environment, I reduce my opex and improve my efficiency because I'm only putting those resources where they're needed. And in a data set and in a hospital, it may be reversed. The power requirements and the requirements in a hospital environment are different than that in an IT environment. And so you're applying the right things in the right spaces.
And Steve, you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, the IT cloud market for healthcare is going to be $30 billion, I think, this year for IT cloud in healthcare. And the total IT market for healthcare is something like 200 billion. So there's still an enormous amount of gear, even if you take out some of the non-clinical software components, it's still a huge number of IT spend at the local level and on-prem. So you have a couple options. If you're a healthcare company, an organization faced with reduction in resources, which a lot of enterprises are, they went from say 5 or 8 architects, now they have 2 or 3 solution architects or hardware engineers or software engineers. So you have the option. So do you move those to go work on the public cloud, or do you maybe work on some sort of cloud native application that you need to develop internally? So in some cases, it makes sense to work on the public cloud. In those cases where you need to start working on a private cloud application, which most are in the healthcare organizations right now based on security and privacy and all those other regulations, you can use open source organizations to immediately expand your 2 or 3 engineers to a wide variety now. So now you have access, in the case of Open Compute, you have access to 8,000 engineers. So if you're a healthcare organization looking to minimize your CapEx or your headcount when it comes to IT, you can really leverage open source organizations to expand your overall resources, both on hardware and on software. So that's one thing around cloud versus on-prem that people should be looking at. If they're going to go on-prem, which most are for some applications, they need to be looking at this open model. And that includes the hardware through George's team, as well as the open concept and the modular side.
You talk a lot about resources. What can you kind of explain to our audience, on the builders, on the manufacturer side and the hospital side, what resources would I need for an on-premises data center?
Well, I'm going to let Rob and George tackle the actual what a team involves, but I can speak to the type of hardware designs that are coming through Open Compute. And there are a couple of key tenets. One is we have this fascination with simplicity. Everything we do has to be extremely simple and open. And I'll give you one example. Every server design that comes through Open Compute must be toolless, meaning that I can repair and replace components on that server within just a couple minutes without using a tool. So our server to technician ratio in Open Compute is quite significant. So a normal data center might be 1 technician for 300 servers. Well, in an Open Compute data center, big or small, you can have one technician for several thousand nodes. And again, extending your resources. So I'll let Rob and George talk about the type of team that they would put around building an on-prem data center.
And Rob, we'll start with you.
I was actually going to flip it on you. I was going to ask George to start it from the customer side, and then
Yeah,
we can kind of talk about the infrastructure to support that.
Yeah, either way, I think, I mean, I know I wanted to tag on something Steve had said also, but I think, I think the key thing there is that you can advance things quickly. And I'll just talk TCO real quickly on that note in terms of numbers of hands required to support an infrastructure. This goes back to me building some stuff for Yahoo Search and back in the early 2002, 2004 days. And Yahoo was doing something interesting, but the first thing I ever talked about was soft costs on their return, right? So we did a TCO, there's hard costs, we really know what those costs are, and they're around physical things like that you buy. The other side was soft costs, and soft costs was strictly around that. How many sysadmins does it require to support that infrastructure? I think at that time, they used 500 as a standard, and they used 2,000 as their value using open hardware and open technologies. So that's a real world comparison that says it's a little dated, but it does tell you something that says it's always been an aspect. And if you can, especially with toolless, drive that kind of efficiency gains and returns on your operational side around resources, that's pretty key. I think when I think specifically to what Rob was saying was, a customer engagement I have now is a Texas healthcare company that has a lot of hospitals and remote surgery centers. And that environment that supports that is coupled with one, an outsourced management data center provider, but two, a resource pool of what used to be 8 pre-COVID to now 2 resources. And so, and they're high-level resources, so really getting down and dirty and understanding some of the key attributes around things that we're talking about selling them and helping them scale with, that can be a challenge. So they do rely on us a lot. So when I think about my reliance on these partners here that I have with me, it's for Rob, I say, hey, this customer really has a high level SLA around redundancy. So I need this N+1 facility. It needs to have this highly efficient cooling. And ideally my power load's going to be this much. How do we design that appropriately? And Rob's first answer is I've got 3 standard designs we can leverage. Let's go ahead and pull one of these. And I say, great. The other side of it for me is I'm leveraging Steve on the other side, which is what hardware would I put based on that application profile and how would I get it there, right? And so you think of open, and I think of, Facebook as an example. They've got maybe, used to be 15 standard hardware designs, and those all profile the workload. One was some compute, some was store, some was fast database, some was NoSQL database, and it went on and on to large scale, storage. It went on now to GPU and advanced, analytics platforms. So I think all those things we're doing it. There's reference designs from all of this, and we can definitely help customers accelerate that time to market to adopt. And the customer I was referencing was, like I said, was doing a large 20+ petabyte storage consolidation off of some big frame stuff onto hyperconverged using x86 workloads as our profile target workload. And what we're going to do is consolidate probably and consume about 70% of that, what was legacy storage, into new modern workloads and modern platforms. And again, leveraging both sides of my equation with Rob and Steve on that side. And again, the community side of accelerating time to market and new designs and efficient designs is pretty amazing. And I joined, I think, OCP, I don't know, 9 years ago, I think, when it started. So, thinking back to then to see all the iterations, you can see the community growing. I can go to the global summit to see what was, 1,500 people is now 6, 7, 10,000 people now attending. That's the community that we built, and it continues to accelerate what I'll say is customer outcomes. Right.
And Rob, on your end, what do you feel as though the resources are on that side?
Yeah, I mean, what we want to do is want to build something that fits customers' needs, right? So geographically or based on their workforce at the specific location, be it a remote surgery center or be it at a hospital, the resources available for that customer are going to be different. And so we might take a different approach, and though we may have 3 standard designs, on hand for George at any one particular time in a certain power load, one might be wall mount cooling units. If the performance requirement isn't very high and we can, it's just a more base load of IT at that facility that doesn't require high performance, you have a low cost, very easily serviceable unit that is probably on modules at a hospital already, right? So you already have a technician that's capable. It's just as simple as possible. And think of the deployment holistically, right? I don't want to put something out there on an island only one person can work on, and then that creates downtime and issues. So it's the right things in the right place, and it goes back to the coordination and all the stakeholders at hand.
And as we move forward, when you talk about having different designs for different for different products and different outcomes, how does on-premises computing allow for that interoperability and that scalability to aid patient care?
From us, from the infrastructure side, it's does it work in coordination with the other systems, and do we have a good partner that can help, like ITRenew, with Sesame program, with an open platform that can take those legacy systems and make them seamless to the user. The healthcare person, with the client doesn't want to be worried about which app they're in, or am I on the right machine? Oh, that machine won't do it, this one will. Do we have it figured out so that when it's being deployed, when it's being used, as seamless as possible?
And George and Steve, we talk a lot about cloud versus on-premises. Are turnkey MDCs, modular data centers, only for facilities for which mass data migration to the cloud is too strenuous?
I guess, Garrett, I'm not sure how I want to answer that one. I think mass data migrations are always difficult, right? Because it's a lot of data deluge and you've got to get it to somewhere else. So, one I'd say is reliance on the cloud is difficult. So reliance and call it lock-in is challenging, right? So when I think about traditional buying of equipment in your IT department, you typically want levers to pull. And so if I have dual vendor source, that's a good thing, right? So if I have HP and Dell and OCP, that's a good thing, right? I want to pull those levers, and I want to pull levers around price, performance, reliability, or some other metric that might be relevant today. So I still want those everywhere else I go to run a workload, right? And so as long as you keep that in mind, which is I can run it here, my price, performance, reliability looks like this, and my TCO to running it here looks like this. It's always cheaper to run it on-prem. Again, there's hidden costs and things, and soft costs you may or may not calculate, but it's always going to be cheaper to run on-prem if you have the infrastructure to do so, right? You don't incur, again, back to where the data lives is pretty critical. So, again, onboarding and offboarding data into or out of the cloud is critical. So again, I'm building solutions that don't really rely on that. I'm trying to containerize applications that I can put them wherever they'd like them to be run. And I still want those metrics, right? There's some neat tools out there to allow me to do different things, like choose where I want to run that. If my power cost in this facility that uses renewable energy is better there, I want to run it there. If I have access to solar and wind power here at my facility, then sure, I want to run it here, right? So I think there's metrics and levers that you want to pull. And I think the key is a customer can run workloads wherever they like them. I think they'd always prove and find themselves, especially in this industry, that on-prem is going to be a better choice. But how do you do it, right? And so limited resource, that makes it challenging. But again, leverage a partnership that's kind of trusted across a broader profile of not just an MDC, not just an application hardware guy, not just, two guys. Use a whole community, right? Now bring in that third part being open. And so I think all those lead to run workloads where you need to, make sure you have the facility to do so. And again, back to kind of my major tenet was, build your own stuff, and many times that's easier with partnerships involved. And so I know that we're helping many customers get there today.
On the interoperability side, there's just one comment. One of the areas within open compute is the way that we move designs and specifications through the community. Is the ultimate goal is that you have one specification, say for a server or for a switch, and then you can have multiple manufacturers make me something based off of that specification. Now that's very different than buying a little bit of one OEM and another type of server and having that hybrid environment. This allows you to mitigate your supply risk by having one specification and then multiple suppliers. So, for example, you can work with George, and George will make a recommendation. And if you're not quite happy with that vendor, or maybe they're not happy with that vendor, they have multiple choices based off of that same spec. So they're not tied to an OEM based on their rebates to push you in a particular direction based on their product catalog. They have open designs that George can leverage and get the best deal for the end customer across one spec, multiple suppliers.
So in essence, turnkey MDCs, modular data center solutions, it's a flexible solution, but it all depends on the resources and what your actual challenge is. Is that correct?
Nailed it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one parallel I can draw is that we deploy modular data centers at PCX for clients for a multitude of reasons outside of mass migration to the cloud. Right? We have lots of clients where a massive data is really not their issue. It may be security, it may be speed to deployment, it may be cost of operation. So finding the right reason to drive it. It's not just because it's too hard to lift it to the cloud. There's a lot of reasons why you'd want to be on-prem.
That's a great segue. When we're talking about that data migration, there's a huge amount of challenges that the medical industry has to deal with as far as digitization goes and data volume, the data deluge that you mentioned, George. Adding flexibility and agility to those workloads. That's a primary challenge and a primary solution that on-premises turnkey solutions can give. But in addition to electronic health records and digital scheduling platforms, video bedside monitoring, digital facility equipment, and so on, these are becoming more and more commonplace in medical facilities. With more and more of these data-dependent equipment protocols being implemented in these medical facilities, how does that data center scalability play into the medical equation when we're talking about on-premises turnkey solutions? Rob?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways you can do it, right? The multi-cloud universe and all the different ways that you can do data. The cloud or remote have, great selling points on being flexible, right? But you pay a premium for that flexibility, right? And you pay a premium for it when you're, maybe just growing into that space. One thing that, a modular data center can do for someone who wants to operate on-prem for various reasons is that you can right size it on day one, and that you don't have to overbuy and you don't have to overbuild as if you built a traditional data center on a plan of, okay, well, how much will I need in 3, 5, 10 years? We can scale up piece by piece, and we have different size building blocks, be it 30 kW to 90 kW that you can build in pieces, and you can change as you go. And hospitals are a great environment because they have usually redundant power or great power sources on site already, and then remote locations, those can be added in and can only back up certain parts of the facility. Maybe it's just the data center. So for us, PCX has coined a lot of our product lines with FLX, and FLX is for flexibility. It's flexibility from what type of vendor you're using, what type of technology you're using, basically the best person or best brand in the seat. And so that only gets expanded when you work on an open platform, because as Steve said and as George said, is that your partners and you as the customer have all the leverage. I have one spec, I have lots of people who can answer to it, and maybe it's that I don't like the deal in a certain place, or maybe it's lead time, or maybe it's availability, or it just really opens the door for an operator to take a lot of the pain that was there on a traditional approach with equipment vendors. Moving to this model really removes all those previous restrictions.
Yeah. Well, Rob, I love the right sizing. I think that's pretty critical, and it applies exactly to that customer use case I mentioned. When you think about a healthcare company that's trying to do things better for the customer and patient care, I think what you're looking at in this case that I'm talking about is you've got an organization that looks like we'll call it a core data center, in this case 2 core data centers, and so they own those, they have those, they're operating, they probably function pretty well. They might be out of space, but they're 2 core data centers that are functioning well. Those are big rolled out facilities. They might have thousands of nodes in those facilities there. Now, to tie to that, to help them grow, I mentioned they have hospitals and remote surgery centers. In their market, they have modern new hospitals, which have a need of say 100 servers in a facility. They have legacy hospitals that might be 10 servers in a facility, right? And so those are 2 profiles of right sizing, which is 10 servers are probably going to fit in some modular thing I can ship them that fits under a desk and plugs in right next to some healthcare system they need, right? And it's similar to the remote surgery centers. there's also a small need of 5 to 10 servers in those locations because they're kind of powerful. But again, I think about right sizing it based on different environments and making sure we have a turnkey solution to do so. And again, back to kind of the right size in the next phase is, they also need to figure out how to run from these core data centers and push some of their applications a little further and closer to these, call it, 100 different hospitals and 600 surgery centers, right? So I think there's a lot of goodness around right sizing, and also knowing that there are right size solutions already well thought out around many common applications. And each customer is different, but I think you can definitely leverage a profiling that we've done with customers already to help right size your environment with us.
And Steve,
oh, sorry, Garrett, but off of George, is not just, what we're seeing is not just off the existing environments, but what's the future environment going to be like? What's the new medical device that's going to be in place, and what are the needs of that medical device 5 years from now? It's going to be pretty hard to predict. So if I build for that today, I'm paying for it now and not using it, and then by the time I get there, maybe it's not enough, and now I have to make compromises, when I get there. If you scale out and you right size, you can put the resources that you need at the time you need them, and you don't have to make the investment today.
And I agree with the scalability. To me also means just time to market, because I was speaking with a particular healthcare organization in Europe, and he said that he needs to move fast because he's been in charge now with evaluating new technologies around AI and robotics, and he doesn't have the time to go through the traditional colo establishment to set things up, to order a server, and to get it going. So he's looking at ways to quickly get a lab environment up and running, to try new technology. So to me, scalability is also about time to market for new technology.
Yeah.
And in the interest of time, I'd like to move on, just to give our audience a chance to ask questions. But before we do that, I'll move to the next slide in a second. But Steve, I just wanted to end this with, and feel free for anyone else to chime in here. But what benefit does all this have on hospital workloads? When we talk about open technology, open designs, what can an on-premises data center do for those hospital workloads to kind of end this off? Because we hear, and George, I know you like to use this phrase, we want you to become your own edge provider to go on premises, right? That's what we're pushing for. And can you speak to that, Steve, on the open side? What benefit does this really have on workloads?
Yeah, so to me, there's a few things that drive these open technologies. One is CapEx. So if you can use an open design longer term, this is a better CapEx investment. Number two is OpEx, which we've already alluded to earlier. The third, to me, is standardizing your SKUs and your rack types. So the more efficient enterprises have a set number of rack types and SKUs that drive the majority of their application. And the fourth, which is the most important, is enterprise level support. In many cases, people try to do this themselves and they undervalue partners. And I've said at the beginning, and I'll finish it off, having strong partners that can help you through this journey is a big deal. It usually happens two ways. An end customer will say, I don't care about learning about the tech, I want you to cover it all. So they'll work with the partners and the partners will take care of all of it. I have other customers who say, this is great, I need your help at the beginning, but I want to learn everything about this open technologies. And then the partner brings that end customer into the community and introduces them. And then it becomes more of a community relationship rather than a vendor-customer relationship. So the fourth one is to me as important as the top three, but those are the four or so key selling points for moving toward open.
So thank you, Steve, for that contribution. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions and audience inquiries. If you do have any questions, please feel free to send those to me at garrett.cutler@pcxcorp.com, and I will get an answer for you shortly. Before we end, I'd like to go ahead and offer everyone some related media. For more information on data center solutions for the medical sector and other related information pertaining to the topics covered in our webinar today, please check out the related blog post posted in the chat, and Michael DeWillow will post those in the chat for you to access now.
Great.
And as a special exclusive thank you for attending our webinar, we'll be sending out our infographic, ITRenew and PCX jointly, which will go more in depth on the topics covered within this webinar today. And you can look for that in your inbox shortly. And I'd like to go ahead and thank our panel. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to join us today and talk about the necessity and the benefits of on-premises turnkey data center solutions. And to all our attendees and registrants, thank you again for attending. And from all of us at PCX, ITRenew, and the Open Compute Project, we really do hope that you have a great rest of your day. Stay safe.
Thanks,
Thank you.
All right. Cheers, you guys.